Hello and good morning. Of course, I'm Nathan Gita, and you're listening to Mountain Standard Time. And if you're with us on Facebook and YouTube, you're watching it as well. Today, I'm speaking with Stuart Parker. He's been on the show a couple times before, and we're very thankful to have him here. Good friend of the show, and he's the president of the Los Altos Institute. We'll be talking about the lockdowns and a few other things here in BC, some news items that he'd like to bring up, I'd like to bring up. And then into the second hour, I'm going to be alone up here, but I'm hoping that you guys send your comments my way and just let me know what's going on, where you're at, and I can kind of discuss that with you. And I'll be bringing up some news stories of my own that I'd like to discuss. The weather has finally turned on us in northern British Columbia. After beautiful weather, basically from Easter until just a few days ago, we finally have those April showers that supposedly yield May flowers. Hopefully this spring brings forth some new blossoms of freedom. The old tired theme of lockdowns, check stops, case numbers, and drudgery has lost its novelty, and it's become exhausting. As previously stated, I was laid off due to the pandemic in March of 2020. In order to not succumb to dependency and owe the government money because of the CERB, I left town to head up north, way up north, actually, to Churchill, Manitoba, the last stop on the Hudson's Bay Railway. I had been there before, once in 2017. In fact, I was helping my producer up there. And now I was helping myself. Speaking of which, my producer needs to expand this for me because it's still minimized. Just a moment. Well, we'll just go live with Stuart there. Stuart, you are on with us, and of course, we are thankful that you're here today. What's on your mind, and what's making you tick today?
Well, I didn't actually show up with a set of grievances, as I often start my day with, which is pretty nice. But saying that, I'm reminded of a wonderful TV show that I followed very carefully. It was very sad when it ended, called Rake. It's an Australian show. And in the final season, the main character is elected to the Australian Senate. And there's this moment where he's on this improbable campaign that he's really only engaged in out of spite. And because his sister's running for the Liberal Party. And so they say, and so one of the interviewers says, Mr. Green, I don't understand it. Your platform just appears to be a bizarre litany of personal grievances. And I thought to myself, I remember when BC politics was a lot more of that. Different candidates would show up and offer their bizarre list of personal grievances with very little central control. And one of the things that, strikes me every morning in BC is how we've gone from being viewed as the most polarized place on earth to being this place with a real policy consensus, with this cross-partisan consensus that everybody's part of. People are shocked right now that Sonia Furstenau is criticizing the government's response to the pandemic. And all sorts of people are coming out of the woodwork to say, my God, how can you question, Bonnie Henry? How can you do this? This is un-British Columbian. And this is especially noteworthy because, of course, I'm sitting here in the riding of Prince George Vailmont, represented by the leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition, who has offered not a word of criticism for the political and economic and medical decisions that this government has made. In fact, in her re-election campaign, Shirley Bond did a thing that blew my mind. She began showing up to ribbon cuttings and announcements by the incumbent government, and essentially ran as though the province had a unity government, a grand coalition for the duration of COVID, and she was part of that government. And I mean, she wasn't yet the leader of the opposition at that point. But the fact that they would choose the person who ran the lowest contrast campaign of anybody in their caucus who survived that drubbing at the polls, is indicative that there's this sense, obviously the opposition's doing some polling. They can't be this dumb all on their own. There's clearly a pollster involved, but it's really stunning to think that the official opposition doesn't have a word of criticism over things like the obvious cover-up of a baby dying of COVID in January, and then the government covering that up for 3 months until another infant died of COVID, and then the BC Coroner's Service effectively functioning as a whistleblower entity and directly saying this baby died of COVID. So you would think that, I mean, I remember when the Ministry of Children and Family Development was created, and it was understood to be like this terrible thing if you got that ministry, because you had just become the minister of dead kids. And it's really interesting that this opposition at this point in our political narrative will not will not say that, children died because of political decisions, because the chief medical health officer kept insisting that children couldn't even contract COVID while children were hospitalized with COVID. And one would think that somebody would be calling for some resignations or something like that. But all we have is one of the two Green members of the legislature making some fairly polite criticisms of the government's response. And, I'm not an anti-masker, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I don't oppose lockdowns. My objection to what's going on in BC is that there hasn't been a lockdown. There's been a lot of half-assed announcements that were never even encoded in law. Most things Bonnie Henry announces on TV are non-binding advice. The Solicitor General never turns them into orders in council. They're just vague advice for any police authority that feels like following through on that. But of course, when cities or islands attempt more serious lockdowns, to have like a Nova Scotia or New Zealand style thing where you just stop travel, get COVID to zero, and then your economy turns back on, the Queen Charlotte Islands, Haida Gwaii, were stopped from doing that by the government last year. One of the reasons Prince Rupert was vaccinated so early as a major global transshipment point, again, was because the Solicitor General overturned the orders for a local lockdown from the Mayor and Council of Prince Rupert. And so there are all kinds of political due process questions that go beyond even COVID, but what is overreach for provincial government? What kind of jurisdiction do Indigenous people have if they can't continue a pre-conquest process of quarantining, which is, one of the things that allowed Indigenous people who survived the European epidemics to survive in the first place? So it is really striking that we have all of these issues that turn up day after day about the government's COVID response. And like everything else, from raw logs to, really anything but real estate, the official opposition is there to endorse the government.
To endorse the government. It's a damning thing to say, but the fact of the matter is, here in British Columbia, I don't really see a way around that statement or that statement being proven false. It's incredible to think that, again, as you've pointed out, BC, which is not famous for its consensus. In fact, it's famous for its division. All these little river valleys, all these tribes of Tories, these tribes of socialists and extremists and cryptocurrencies and church basements, and God knows what else is happening around out there. This very bizarre, diverse, divided place has some very interesting political manifestations. I don't know if anybody ever quite took off their shoe and start banging it on the table. But I mean, there were some pretty strong words, both sides. There's some pretty great excuses too. Like I think Ghilardi once said he needed to test the road. That's why he was caught going 230 down the number one. So if that's the case, if that's the world we came from, and indeed, you're a native Vancouverite, that was the Vancouver you came from, a very dynamic, diverse place. It was a Tory town at one point in some places. And now it's become blasé. What's the answer to our politics if that's what's happened?
Well, I think there's really two parts to it. One is that, of course, you do see this when a policy consensus appears. That's when the two sides scream the loudest, because they actually have nothing to argue about. So things get very personal, or they get focused on really specific wedge issues, that, well, let's all take strong positions on the Israel-Palestine conflict, or let's all take strong positions on human rights in China. So you pick an issue that's outside your jurisdiction, or you pick something that affects a tiny proportion of the people in your jurisdiction, or that's, more, that's an issue that functions at a symbolic level, right? And so Republicans and Democrats perfected that game in the United States of proceeding with a complete policy consensus and screaming at each other. And of course, you notice how both establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans felt that Donald Trump was an existential threat to the system, not because of, like being a weird guy who runs afoul of the law with some frequency, but because it would actually mean that there wasn't a policy consensus on a significant foreign policy issue. And that was terrifying. That was viewed as undermining America. Now, the thing is that Americans have a tool for dealing with a policy consensus between their major parties, which is that they have an open primary system. So if people want to realign a national party, there's a way to do that democratically. You get behind a Donald Trump if you're on the right, you get behind a Bernie Sanders if you're on the left. Highly distinctive policies are put forward, and voters come out in huge numbers to select parties' candidates. One thing that Canadians may not know is that until 1993, although we didn't have a primary system, there was a two-stage process legally to selecting a candidate in a riding. The leader of the party had to agree, and there had to be a local nominating meeting that was open to all party members that was run democratically, and candidates, anybody who showed up at the nominating meeting who was a member was eligible to run. And then there were these huge meetings. We remember them from the 80s, sometimes thousands of people signed up, joined parties, came to meetings, and voted. But between 1993 and 2003, a series of amendments were made to our federal and then provincial election laws, which make the selection of candidates solely the discretion of a party's leader. So party leaders can now pick people. They will sometimes seek the advice of a local riding association, but normally, if a party and the local association disagreed, the party couldn't run a candidate. That was the state of affairs until 1993, that both groups had a veto. But now, political party leaders can simply choose any person they want and appoint them as the candidate in a riding. And sometimes even incumbent members of parliament don't get a chance to run for a second term, because the leader of their party will just fire them and replace them with another person. And if the leader of the party doesn't think they can persuade local people, they just appoint them. And so the one democratic check we had on the centralized power of political parties, the emergence of an elite policy consensus, was the ability of party members to choose who represented them. And that's been eviscerated under the law. And one of the things that has replaced it is this thing called the vetting committee. A candidate vetting committee is created by a party leader. The names of its members are rarely released to the public. And what you do, if you want to become a candidate for a party now, you pay a non-refundable fee to that committee, who functions not so much as people say it's like opposition research. They're just checking to see if you've said anything silly in the past. That's not true. Candidate vetting committees look for people not who weren't embarrassing in the past, but people who will be obedient in the future. What they're looking for is, did this person ever get into a workplace dispute? did this person was this person a dissident in student politics at their university? Are they in conflict with the professional association they're a member of? There are all these little signs to find people who will toe the line, who will not be difficult. And so you pay your fee, your $5,000 or whatever. You open your life up to this committee and its anonymous members. And if they don't like you, you may not even get your fee back. They might just keep the money and say that's how much it cost us to figure out that you couldn't run for us. So the implementation of high fees to keep people of regular income out of politics, and then this veto process that's conducted by a kind of political star chamber that every party has. And then, of course, a party like the New Democrats adds one additional layer, which it got into trouble over last election, which is their argument that if a white man who is not disabled or gay has occupied this seat before, they can't be succeeded by someone who's demographically the same. So the NDP says they must be succeeded by an equity-seeking minority, an equity-seeking group. Now, an equity-seeking group is any group that is oppressed on any basis or discriminated against on any basis except class. There's no equity mandate for working class people in the NDP. There is an equity mandate for any other group. And it's an easy equity mandate to get through. In Columbia River Revelstoke in 2017, there was a paraplegic woman who was seeking the NDP nomination, but the party didn't like her very much. So they talked a straight white married guy into running for the nomination. And all he had to do was to indicate in a private meeting that he had at some point filleted another man. And so if you're willing to go through that indignity of if you're straight and you want to misrepresent your sexual orientation, then you can, and then you meet the equity-seeking criteria of the New Democratic Party. I had a big debate with Harry Lally. I said, no, I think this guy is so principled, he probably went out and did this as well, in order to run honestly. But that's a strange requirement to have of a candidate. But that's the scene we're in. And it shows that people who are sitting in our legislature are the ladder climbers you meet at work, the people who are trying to get promoted, the people who will do anything to fit in to get promoted. And they see themselves not as the group that's managing our province's civil service. They see themselves as part of it.
It's all a bit odd. It's all a bit odd because, and it's funny to hear it from your side, Stuart, because for us on the right, especially us on kind of the hardware store, populist, conservative guy walking down the street, sort of Tory sort of understanding, we all know this about the federal Tory party, that it has gotten completely out of control. We see the eliminations happen. We see it especially of socially conservative candidates, most of whom would pass muster everywhere else. They're well dressed, they don't swear. They're social conservatives, and they're fine on a lot of counts. But they just think that maybe babies in the womb should be left there and not torn to shreds, or maybe they should be adopted instead. And they have lots of new policy around that. They don't want to denigrate single mothers or any of that. They want to help people. They want to hand out money. There's a very progressive, socially conservative way of looking at that, and that's all great. And then the party sidelines them as if they had said, Hitler was right. And it's just mind-boggling. So we see that in the conservative side, but it's interesting to hear that it happens in the left-wing side too. Like that there's no insurgency inside of the left-wing parties of Canada as well. What led to this? Why did we change from having real ideas in politics to this consensus?
Well, I think it is actually that it is the abortion debate that produced this outcome, both locally and federally. So when the Liberal Party of Canada was at war with each other, right, the main thing statistically that is most likely to make people liberals, I'm sad to say for you, is of course Catholicism, right? People who identify as Catholic tend to vote liberal unless they live in Newfoundland, And then the party system is opposite, and the Liberals are Protestants and the Tories are Catholics. But in the rest of the country, that's the thing. And of course, long before evangelical Christians became concerned about abortion, that was really the issue around which the Catholic Church remade itself in the 19th century after the conquest of the Papal States. It went from being the world's largest abortion provider to the world's largest anti-abortion organization overnight in the 1850s. And so when the Paul Martin, John Turner faction was fighting the, Jean Chrétien faction of the party, the especially Catholic pro-life activists saw this conflict within the Liberal Party as a great opportunity for entryism. So they created an organization called Liberals for Life, and they won all kinds of nomination meetings in 1984 when the Liberals lost most of their seats, when they lost 3/4 of their seats. The number of pro-life Liberal MPs increased even in the 84 election, and they increased further in the 88 election. And after 88, Brian Mulroney declined, even though he was invited to by the Supreme Court, enact a new abortion law. And so this was going to be a live issue. And the number of Liberal pro-life MPs exceeded the number of Tory MPs. And at that time, the votes of social conservatives, were being competed for on many fronts. And the thinking was, well, those people are mostly going to vote Reform in the West and Bloc in the East. And so Chrétien decided to purge the anti-abortion caucus from the Liberals. And so he got the bylaws of the Liberal Party changed in order to conduct that purge. And it actually was the beginning of all of the legal changes, because once he got into office, he took the constitution of the Liberal Party and effectively imposed it on everybody else, that every other federal leader would have the same sweeping powers he did. And he then used that as a way of attacking Preston Manning and Stockwell Day for not purging their anti-abortion MPs. And so you're quite right. Historically, it's completely bound up in this. Same thing in BC. In 1988, Bill Vander Zalm attempted to criminalize abortion in BC, and he also did some very silly things like trying to arrest the leader of the teachers union for treason and sedition. And so there was this sense that Vander Zalm was out of control. And Vander Zalm was a pretty quirky guy. So there was a meeting of the finance minister, the attorney general, and the senior caucus researcher for social credit. And they effectively seized power from Vander Zalm and governed the province themselves for 2 years. The late George Gibault, a good friend of mine, was the organizer of the coup with Mel Cuvelier and Bud Smith. And so again, this issue, because it couldn't be manifested in the party system, that there was this false consensus, one of the first moves that was made was to reassure British Columbians that social credit was not interested in changing policy around women's reproductive systems. And of course, there was an attempt by the majority in the Social Credit Party to resolve that by choosing Rita Johnson as Bill Vander Zalm's successor, but she really wasn't in office long enough to push back against that. So by the time Mike Harcourt took power, the bureaucracy had been running the province for 3 years. And Mike Harcourt came out of commission government. He had been the mayor of Vancouver. And in our cities, we have this thing called commission government, where the way it's structured is that the senior bureaucrats make almost all of the decisions, and the city councilors sort of serve to report potholes to them, as far as I can tell. I think that's what city councilors do in commission government. And so Mike Harcourt, under the NDP, and then later Gordon Campbell under the BC Liberals, restructured British Columbia's bureaucracy and its relationship with the legislature along these municipal commission government lines, where the government was going to be post-ideological. It was going to use these principles of progressivism that we have to remember was neither a right-wing nor left-wing ideology. It used to be that every party had a progressive faction and every party had a populist faction. And what's happened now, of course, is that progressives have seized control of the parties of the left. And the only place where there's still a populist faction at all pushing back is on the right. I vehemently disagree with the positions taken by the people who are pushing back against Erin O'Toole. I believe in climate science. I don't think the cops should be investigating miscarriages and putting anybody in prison if they don't like what they see. I don't have any time for that. But I do think that it's amazing that social conservatives and the federal Tories this time broadened their coalition and worked with climate denialists and all kinds of other groups that are also being pushed out of the tent in order to actually make Erin O'Toole lose a vote at a convention as an extraordinary achievement. And, I got to say, I have a lot of disagreement about the policies, but I have a lot of admiration for what's going on the right when it comes to trying to continue to use every lever of power possible to assert democratic control over a party.
I think that actually came up in something out of the January issue of Jacobin. I think there was the woman who organized strongly in Nevada, which is a right to work state. And she was organizing the hospitality industry. She wrote a bit for Jacobin that now that Joe Biden was going to finally be inaugurated after everything else had happened, that said, actually, if you want to finish Reconstruction, we need to vote Republican.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, there does seem to pushing all of the populists out of the left parties into the right and pulling the progressives out of the right-wing parties into the left has produced this thing where it used to be, right, that one of the reasons we got rid of having man camps up in northern BC in the 30s and 40s is because it used to be that angry young men with unstable employment were socialists mostly in this province, right? That we'd better build these company towns and domesticate these young men and get them married because they're going to march on the legislature. And, this will be the first jurisdiction that flips and sides with the Soviet Union on this continent. That was the thinking of Premier John Hart when he created the forest appurtenance system. It wasn't about, equity and keeping resources and jobs in the interior and the north. It was about stopping a revolution. And it used to be assumed that if you were angry and didn't trust the system, that you were probably a CCFer or a New Democrat. And what's amazing is that the CCF and the NDP went, we don't want you people. Sure, you're like 80% of our historic base, but you're not our kind of people. Instead, let's invite let's invite some Tory organizers in who really don't like how messy democracy is. And my friend Bob Ransford's a great example. He was a progressive conservative, a real progressive conservative. Those people you kind of drove out of the Tories for a little while. And Bob was Jerry St. Germain's organizer. He's Mulroney's man in town. Still, Mulroney comes, stays with him. All that sort of stuff. His politics, which are, regulation, state mandated regulation of oligopolies and, following the advice of climate scientists and looking at, these very technocratic metrics. His politics haven't changed in the time that I've known him. He and I have been friends. But the politics that made him a member of the Mulroney government in 1988 are the same politics that make him a person who votes NDP today, because that progressive spirit of state regulation, trusting bureaucrats, trusting experts, has migrated across the spectrum. So it's odd how that cultural change happened. I don't think we're unique, though. The same thing happened to the United States. The Democratic Party filled up with the elites of the Republican Party. And it's still filling up, right? They're getting Steve Schmidt and David Frum and all those fine folks as the other party becomes more hostile to that kind of progressive policy consensus politics.
You know, if you ever want to get in on a group project, Stuart, and we can go and arrest somebody together for treason, I don't know who you'd nominate, but we can definitely arrest somebody for treason together. Of course, our mutual friend John C. Thompson has been commenting. Fascinating. Stuart knows more about Canadian political history than a few other people do. And that's why we have you on the show, Stuart, because you can just preach at us all day about the eccentricities of our time. What is there a way forward? Is there a way forward? Is there any way to kind of break the consensus or to form a new party, or will that always be stymied by the media? I mean, the Christian Heritage tried to do this. SoCons have tried to do this for years. Is this ever going to change?
Look at the last set of provincial election results. The fever is about to break. I mean, don't look at the Lower Mainland. Lower Mainland's deeply depressing. But if we look at those 24 ridings that Darcy Reppin and the Rural BC Party identified as Rural BC, we see, despite a complete media blackout and no ability to campaign door to door, basically like zero access to voters. We saw double-digit results for the Christian Heritage Party for the first time, double-digit results for the Libertarian Party for the first time, over 30% of the vote for the Conservative Party and the Peace, and the Rural BC Party also getting over 10%. This was a surprise election that nobody was even able to contest. And you can see that folks who are not part of the progressive urban culture of the Southwest that we have a little bit of in Kelowna and a little bit in downtown Prince George, but is mostly a Southwestern phenomenon. People who aren't part of that bubble basically went to the polls, looked at the major parties on the ballot, and a shocking proportion of them voted for candidates and parties they had not heard a word from during the election campaign itself. And so I do think that the long-term strategy, which had been to deplatform anyone who was outside the policy consensus, right? I was shut out of every leader's debate while I was the leader of the Green Party. It wasn't until there was a successor who was campaigning on these small L liberal policies that they were let in. Deplatforming worked when the mainstream media was powerful. But even with social media now chiming in and censoring us and deplatforming us and destroying our accounts or our sites, you can see that people are absolutely fed up, and they'd rather, at least 10% of them would rather randomly select an unknown party with unknown policies than return another incumbent. So I think next election, when we're able to campaign on foot, go door to door, I think very different things are going to happen in northern BC. Very different things are going to happen in the East Kootenays and in the Caribou. And, maybe that can help turn things around in the rest of the province. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I've pulled out of Vancouver. My confidence in the place isn't that great. So I do think that the electoral system still might have some teeth in it up here in these small ridings whose relative population keeps declining. So they're actually easier to campaign in with time due to the underservicing by the provincial government of communities like Valemont or McBride or what have you. Also, just a word about Thompson commenting. I do hope I do hope that this show makes use of John Thompson's expertise. He was executive director of the Mackenzie Institute, which was, I think it remains, it was a very much a conservative foreign policy think tank, but it was one that was very principled and consistent. And The reason John isn't in Ontario is because ultimately it ran afoul of Stephen Harper's appeasement of China. And I think that's a great reason. That's a great reason to fall out of favor, is taking a firm stand in favor of Chinese human rights. So John has just a tremendous wealth of knowledge that I know this show will benefit from. He's the guy who got me my Christian TV gig when I lived in Ontario.
It's something that we're looking forward to as well, to try and reach out to more people, bring more people on. Of course, this is still just our first month, so we're just getting our legs under us, but we're very thankful for the contributors we've had so far, yourself, Stuart, to others who have been here, and to all that comment. And of course, we will be making contact with John and others in the coming days. With that idea, then, that there is going to be, at some point the dam is going to break, at some point there's going to be a tide that is going to change. What does that party need to look like? Or does that possibility not, as somebody who would consider themselves, progressive in their politics, or wanting radical changes towards a greener world and to things like that, Stuart? I'm not trying to mischaracterize.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing is that's the argument that your establishment friends, all your friends with the nice cozy jobs, wherever they are, or the people who were your friends but then pushed you out a window or something, they are in their cushy jobs and they're holding on for dear life, and they're scared about this new wave that's coming, and they're saying that the new wave is going to be fascistic. It's going to destroy everything. Do you worry about that as someone whose politics are at least closer to the people who are currently in charge, to a certain extent, not entirely, obviously?
I mean, I absolutely, I do worry, not just on the right, but on the left, that different parts of the authoritarianism we saw in the 1920s are coming back. Obviously, I've been a critic of the left's recent embrace of eugenics. I don't think that once you develop a political program that involves escalating mass sterilizations of neurologically disabled and Indigenous youth, you're running a eugenics program. It doesn't matter what you call it. And Chris was on the other day to talk about that. So I see that on the left and on the right. I see it everywhere. I see all kinds of fascistic tendencies popping up because we've been told that this thing we're living under is democracy. And so the conclusion more and more people are reaching is that democracy doesn't work. And that's why the best thing we can do to push back against authoritarian impulses, where we don't have people beating other people in the street, as happened with Chris Elston, and doing so with impunity and assistance of the police, right? We know that of course, there are places where the police look the other way when it's the soldiers of Odin, and there are places where the police look the other way when it's the people who beat up Chris. But at the end of the day, all of those trends are incredibly worrying. And so we have to continue to engage with people and show them that democracy can do something better. Engagement is the only way forward. And it's going to be uncomfortable for a while because it's not just that there may not be progressives in every party anymore, and there might not be populists in every party anymore, but there are definitely fascists in every party now. And that's going to mean some uncomfortable work. But I think that Darcy Reppin and his folks are really on the right track. That a successful populist insurgency will be cross-partisan. It will appeal to populists from the far right to the far left on an agenda of decentralizing the power of the state, democratizing the power of the state, and placing control over resources in the hands of the people near them. And those are things that people are hungry for across the political spectrum. And they're also process solutions. So it allows people to bracket what the outcome of a decentralized decision will be and focus on the rightness of decentralizing the decision making. And so I think it's going to be, if there's going to be a successful move, it's going to have to be through a party that is either nominally provincial but is clearly making a regional appeal, or a party that is avowedly regional. I think the best model we can look to is way out east with the Labrador Party. The Labrador has always functioned as a colonial resource periphery for the mainland of Newfoundland. And it developed its own political consciousness as a result. The one NDPer who holds a seat in Labrador is the person who brought back the Labrador independent flag and flies that flag at their office. And of course, before that, there was the Labrador Party, where there was a party that was seated in the legislature in St. John's to speak up for the people who were, who were delivering all of the ore and all of the timber to the island. So I think there are good models. I think that's one of the paradoxes of being a regionalist or a decentralist, is that you have to develop solidarity and learn from the other decentralists and regionalists. And I think that for authoritarians like Trump, who are not internationalists, part of the genius of the Trump campaign was making itself part of this club of nationalists and exchanging more workers, more strategy, more information across international borders than the internationalists they were running against, than the globalists they were running against. So I think there are people, all over the country who'd like to see rural BC get out from under some thumbs. And I think there's, and we see that throughout the West. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of it is built around some fanciful ideas about oil, but I don't think that has to be the center. And I don't think this kind of politics will succeed if continuing to just export natural resources and become more and more of an international pariah because people don't like what you're exporting. That's not a way forward to achieve independence. That can't be the center of something more populist here.
Freedom fries. I'll remember that. Speaking to your point of international influence in the American election, ironically on the Trump side, I do happen to know a few people who went down there. They fought hard. They have some things to say about what happened that night in the wee hours in the morning, this last election, but we won't get into that just right now.
And you know what? Those people were, absolutely entitled to do that. God knows how many Canadians went down to help Obama in 2008. Fewer in 2012 with the gray hair, but I remember 2008 and the tremendous amount of political tourism. And I think, we live in a strange globalized world. There's medical tourism, there's political tourism now.
Yes, there is. There indeed is. I know that you have to leave us at around 10 o'clock. We're coming up to 1:45. Let's talk a little bit about just some of the realities of the BC lockdown. Obviously, I would like things to open back up. I'm sure on your side there's more of a consensus that it was never properly shut down to begin with.
So we got none of the benefits of locking down because we didn't properly lock down. And so, I think that so the first thing to recognize is that this is theater. That the BC management of the pandemic is political theater to distract people from the tourism and hospitality sector's control of the policy. If you want to go to the provincial lobbyist registry, you can read the dates on which different parts of the hospitality industry sent their lobbyists in to achieve policy changes. So you can actually see, you can track a timeline for the Solicitor General breaking the Prince Rupert quarantine, the Solicitor General breaking the Haida Gwaii quarantine. And the idea is that we're going to keep the schools open and we're going to keep as much hospitality work happening as possible, because unlike other provinces where businesses need to hit quarterly, revenue figures, business in British Columbia is so heavily indebted. Our property market has made everybody so heavily mortgaged. Property taxes in downtowns of cities like on Robson Street in Vancouver are indescribably crippling. And so what that means is you just can't close a hospitality sector business completely unless the government's prepared to lend a lot of money or let a lot of bankruptcies happen. And so This is the sector that's been most active in forming our policies. And the result is, of course, that Bonnie Henry gets on her TV show with Adrian Dix, or maybe Adrian Dix gets on his TV show with Bonnie Henry, who was already viewed with great suspicion, right? She had basically retired after her screw up during the SARS scandal. She's really rehabilitated by the NDP as it's great because they craft her image. They spend $60,000 crafting her image, getting her little sayings: be kind, be calm, be safe. And they set all this up because it's her job to make it look like we're taking the pandemic seriously. And they can sack her anytime. She's a political creation of theirs. She's almost a fictional creation of theirs. And they can, and so she's Adrian Dix's human shield. Adrian Dix was Glenn Clark's human shield. You might remember back in the 90s, memo to file. There will be some other memos to file, and they will have to do with how long he's had doubts about Bonnie Henry. So it's her job to cover government inaction. Whenever she announces a rule, it is almost never a rule. That is almost never made an order in council. So if you want to defy it, and you're not somebody the cops are going to have a problem with for other reasons, you get to do whatever you want. Like take this last no non-essential travel. Read what happened with the few people who were caught by that order, because that's one of the few orders they made binding. Basically, the government report says, well, we found these people in breach of the order, but this was only because they needed to be better educated about the terminology they were using. What that means is these people were stopped by the cops and didn't use the word essential in order for the cops to let them go. So everybody remember to say essential, and then this order doesn't affect you, right? So that's why the provincial government's like, well, what's happening with all these people staying in hotels? Oh, it's the job of the hotels to determine if those were essential travelers. It's not the job of the police. It's not the job of health inspectors. It's the job of hotel managers, apparently, to enforce the province's order. But that's the exception. Most of the time, Bonnie Henry will just say something like, there's a mask mandate, and there'll be no mask mandate if you go and look at the book of orders in council that the government has issued. Most orders in council pertaining to COVID, the single largest number of them, are to shut down local governments attempting to implement lockdowns and quarantines. That is the primary purpose of the actual laws that come out in Victoria. But also, what if you don't like Bonnie Henry's show because she's condescending, especially to rural people, and implies that even asking her questions is unkind and not calm? Because goodness knows, why would anyone not be calm at this point? So when she does that routine, many people find it profoundly off-putting. I find her press conferences unwatchable. Does the government try any other method to notify people? No. The government doesn't take out radio ads when it's made a new non-order. The government generally takes out radio ads to say, hey, we're managing this really well. Be kind, be calm, be safe. So the provincial government is supposed to create this sense that there's a lot of action going on. And I know for folks who are used to obeying the rules their whole life, this will shut you down to go, well, I guess my travel isn't essential. Maybe I shouldn't go. But there's nothing actually stopping you. The only thing we've done that has had any significant impact is to end indoor seating intermittently at restaurants. And this has typically been involved with the major expansion of outdoor seating at restaurants for patio season.
Well, it's not in, it's outdoor, right? If you build inside, then,
yeah,
so
I was just walking down George Street, right? And there's people in the outdoors of Crossroads Pub, all unmasked, all sitting there cheek by jowl, right? They're packed in closer, tighter than they would be inside. And we see the same thing with Government Street in Victoria and all these other places. That, again, this is hygiene theater. And this, and who's suffering? Well, you know how the provincial government's main thing also is to deflect blame and blame young people. Blame young people for getting together and having a good time. Now, young people are supposed to get together when older people have a good time on restaurant patios. So these poor kids who don't have an eviction moratorium, that means they've got to make rent every month or they're homeless. They're in their early 20s, they're working in the food service sector, and they are dealing with dozens or hundreds of unmasked people every shift. And when there are big outbreaks, some party is always blamed. So that folks like me, who's, my hip's really acting up this week, I couldn't dance at one of those parties. And if I'm all, sitting at home being angry about about COVID, it's like, oh, those damn kids having fun I can't have. It must be their fault. And of course, John Horgan feeds into this with, don't ruin it for the rest of us. No, it's people Horgan's age sitting at the bar being waited on by kids who are there because it's a choice between being in a highly infectious environment or being on the street in a highly infectious environment. And they're also shouldering the blame as well as shouldering all the labor. So what this government is doing should be satisfactory to no one. If you're a person who prizes personal freedom above public health objectives, you hate this government. You're at the anti-mask protests. But if you're a person who prizes public safety above freedom of assembly in the short term, you should be equally enraged that this government has undertaken a bunch of measures that have clearly failed, that have given us one of the highest positivity rates in the global north, giving us the fastest rate of growth in childhood COVID, because we will never shutter our schools. All of these statistics, they're horrific, but the idea of this pageantry of this TV show that everybody has to watch, that's supposed to hold support in the for the government among people who are supposedly really concerned about their neighbor's health, and deflecting blame from public policymakers to youth culture is it's a cheap, crappy trick, especially because a lot of those kids showed up and voted Horgan back in. So there's a tremendous disrespect for the party's own voters in proceeding with this prioritization of blame over any other public policy objective.
I think ultimately, when it comes to this question, it's funny how it is a generational fight again. It really is boomers versus the millennials and Gen Z, especially Gen Z, as they're coming up in the ranks of being in their early 20s and that sort of thing, or kind of finally breaking at teenagehood. And ultimately, I think one of the things that's going to be a takeaway from the pandemic is just like the colossal policy failure it was. At what point? Perhaps you can kind of give us a concluding thought on that, Stuart. Is it a stay or go thing? Do we have to climb into full lockdown, or at some point should we just pull the lever, pull out the power from underneath of all these people that have been puppeteering us for a year, and just say, look, like, honestly, you could do this better yourself. Just let it go.
Well, no, I think because we don't know a lot about the Indian variant, we're not tracking it. There are all these other variants we're not tracking, and we don't know the relative lethality of those variants. So, no, I would like to see actual public health officials run an actual public health program. Now, that might involve some short-term pain for business, and it might involve a bunch of hospitality sector bankruptcies. I think that if we're prepared to endure that, we've seen in other jurisdictions that when there's a flare-up and you properly lock down, you are out of the woods within a little over a month. And I think there's a pretty clear track record there. Of course, we should proceed very actively with vaccination and all this other stuff. But the other thing is, this policy failure is an absence of policy. It's not bad policy. So all we're really talking about is canceling a TV show, not changing policy at all.
Well,
Anyway, I'm going to have to let you go there.
I know. Yeah, I mean that's damning, and I don't think there's a lot of ways to correct that. Again, we fall on different sides of some of these issues, but nonetheless, one, as I've stated before on this program, we're about building coalitions, and two, Stuart Parker is just great TV. So it.
Thanks very much. We'll see you next Thursday.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Stuart. No, so we're gonna pivot a little bit here. I see we did get some stuff in the comments. We'll start addressing some of that momentarily. I want to clarify one or two things on my end just before we move forward here. I definitely fall on the side of the anti-lockdown. I don't think they've worked, and I believe that we've played with that enough time, and it's just not working. There's no nice way of saying it. It isn't working, and we need to move forward into something else because we can't continue to be married to bad policy. I've talked about this before, and I'm going to talk about it again just briefly here for anybody who hasn't kind of heard me make this kind of rant before. But I'm adopted, and the family I'm adopted to through my father's side, that side is German. My mother's actually Low German because she's Mennonite. So the High Germans and Low Germans are all together in my little family. And my father, his mother's still alive, my grandmother. She's a true anti-fascist of the old school. She actually grew up in Germany during a certain time period in history, and she and her family were very against what was happening. They're very angry with it. They did actually agitate with anybody who's in the crowd here, in the comment crowd that knows who Bonhoeffer is and all that jazz. They were actually a part of that same movement, not directly. They didn't meet the guy or whatever, but they were a part of that same underground movement that was trying to undermine what was happening in Germany. And so she remembers a lot of things about that time because she was a young girl. I think she was probably 9 when the war started and about 14 when the war ended. And the thing that I'm trying to drive home here is that she recalls in no uncertain terms. I love her to death, but I mean, you know, she'll actually believe what she's told about from CBC and that sort of thing. That's something that we have to go back and forth on sometimes. She and I argue about this, whether the mainstream media can be trusted. But whatever. I love her very much, obviously. The point that I'm trying to drive home here, though, is that she recalls in no uncertain terms that when she went to England, so after the war, they tried to mix the children together in order to try and make sure there wouldn't be another war between those belligerents, because, of course, they all had to be on the same side against communism. We all understand this as a geopolitical strategy. And so the children of Germany got into pen pal relationships with the children of France and England, perhaps even Canada and the United States, but certainly France and England, to try and make there to be some cross-cultural pollination in order to ensure that there would still be peace come, 10 years after the war, 15 years after the war, 20 years after the war. And her pen pal was an English girl, and so she was a young woman, but just becoming a young woman, and so was the young girl there, just into her adolescence, and eventually a young woman. And they finally decided to meet. I guess she probably would have been. I guess they both would have been probably about 19, just finishing school. We have to remember school went longer back then, right? Just like it did in Ontario until recently with grade 13. And what happened was she went to England. We're in the 1950s now. We're probably just into either Churchill's re-election after being tossed out after the war, or just before that. So it's still a Labour government, and the Labour government had decided to marry the war. So there's still rationing and everything else. So she goes to England. The place still looks like, it still looks like the Blitz is going on. There's still rubble everywhere. Things have not been repaired, and there's still the rationing of petrol, rationing of food, right? So people are lining up to take their bare necessities of life. Now, why am I bringing this up? So what happened was they got married to bad policy, and they kept it around for almost a decade. That was fine during the war. Everything had to go to the war effort. We had to win the war. We had to sacrifice. People were gardening on the boulevards of streets in order to make more food for the war effort. Like, it was an incredible, they called those victory gardens. It was an incredible time. But at a certain point, the war ended, and the policy that had gone with the war needed to go out with the war as peace reigned. But instead, they kept the policy. They nationalized their healthcare industry. They kept the nationalized coal and steel and everything else that happened. And England's economy, no longer now being driven by the war itself, started to turn in on itself, and things became very stultified and stuck because, of course, you'd built all these lock and dam systems within your economy in order to control the flow of goods and services in order to win the war. We were out of the war. We weren't directly related with England anymore because of the Balfour Act, but whatever. The point is, we were out of the war, we were out of the woods, but we were still trotting along as if we were in the middle of it. And meanwhile, a former belligerent and a former enemy, right, in the form of Germany, and then my grandmother visiting England, as she mentioned to the young girl in her family, she said, we don't line up for petrol anymore. We don't line up for gas. We don't line up for food anymore. We just go around to shops and buy the things we need, and our economy is fine. And we're building the buildings back up. We're going to rebuild everything after the carpet bombing that happened. And they all looked really enviously at her. It's like, yeah, well, you lost the war, but it looks like you won it. And they were denigrating their own society because they had gotten married to the wrong policy. That's what happened. So why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because what's gone on with the lockdown, in my opinion, is the exact same problem. It was bad policy to begin with. The idea that somehow you could just lock everybody up and hope that the virus was going to die out by itself, it was nonsense to me from the start. All we could ever do was take some precautions. I haven't seen my grandmother in a while, and when I do finally see her, I'm probably not going to give her a hug. I'm just going to say hello to her, and we're going to just chat at a distance, probably, that sort of thing. But that's the best I can do. That's my way of bridging the gap. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that we got married to bad policy. And that doomed us from the beginning. Our entire mentality was doomed from the beginning. And we have to back up, and we have to rethink this, because it's not working. And we hear that every day, that the cases are climbing, and that there's people in the hospital, etc. I still think that fundamentally the virus is not nearly as well. I think it's deadly to those it's deadly to, and it isn't to those who it isn't to. I think that's the problem. And if you're susceptible to it, it hits you hard. If you're not susceptible to it, or as susceptible, it hits you differently. And that's life. That's life. That's how it is. There's a lot of people who drag their feet, who have tripped on a flight of stairs because they never really learned to lift their feet a little bit higher. That's just life. That's how it is. And simultaneously, I'm very short, and I can't hit my head against a door jamb. I'm not that short, but I'm 5'8". I am never going to hit my head against a door jamb. That's reality. Everything is 6 feet or more. I'm too short to hit my head against a door jamb. That's the nature of life, the nature of the world we constructed. That's how things are. It's kind of tragic. I'm not saying that I want everybody to hit their head against door jambs, or everybody to trip down a flight of stairs. I'm saying that this is the nature of things. And all you can do is take precautionary steps. You can duck your head, or you can lift up your feet a little bit and hopefully not trip on stuff. That's the best you can do. And if you don't take those precautionary steps, then, you go do what you got to do. Let's check in a little bit here with some of the comments we've had. The Albertan had commented earlier. He's a regular guy that we have on here. He had commented that a lot of the issue is that the boomer generation grew up in a time where it was assumed government was somewhat benevolent. Government now is largely malevolent to the individual. I think that if we're going to get into this whole question of what was it like back then versus now, I think that the way to look at that is that, if nothing else, the boomers grew up in a time of economic expansion instead of contraction, and where business was interested in expansion instead of contraction, that panics were bad and not good. Disaster capitalism wasn't a thing, and the idea of leaning into a crisis wasn't a thing. Maybe politically it tried to score some points there, but for the most part, both morally, ethically, as well as just the structure of the system we had built. It wasn't about the underwriting. It wasn't about the insurance. It wasn't about taking the insurance money and running. Your house wasn't worth more in insurance than it was what you paid for it. So you weren't ahead to burn it down. And that's kind of the difference. in the time periods we're in, right? Or that the inflationary cost of your housing or whatever. That's a bad analogy. I'll retract that. I'll just say that I was trying to say something else. But the point is that what our commenter is talking about there when he's talking about that different generation, I think it's just fundamentally that time period. That time period was, again, it was just, there was more opportunity in that time period. Government just didn't have the power it has today. There were not drones come check up on you and take a look at your property and then go rat on you to the assessment authority to come and bill you for the 15 sheds you've built that are just sheds and you just wanted them and it's your property. So who gives a crap why they get to influence that? But now they want to send you a bill from our taxes or get you to deconstruct them and tell you that you're in violation of some ordinance that nobody can cite by memory. They have to look it up. They don't know where it is. That's the world we live in today. That's where we are today. And that's a literal thing that happened. That's a real life thing that happened. Pictures from a satellite or from a drone used against somebody on their own property who was in the middle of nowhere, and it was irrelevant whether or not they had built this thing or not built this thing or up to code or not. They weren't putting people in it. It wasn't going to light on fire and kill anyone. But of course, they had to be sent their tax bill because God forbid you do anything for yourself without having to pay taxes on it. What I think is the difference between the millennials and the boomers and Gen Z now and the boomers is that, again, that ever expanding opportunity, or so it seemed, versus the ever contracting opportunities, or so it seems for a lot of people, instability, the gig economy, and finally that political question, right? So there's been moments, right? Like, so the Bernie Sanders revolution in the United States for a lot of young people who are left of center, the Trump revolution in the United States, again, for a lot of young people right of center. Trump attracted a lot of young people into his campaign and into his movement. And here in Canada, I mean, I guess Justin Trudeau was kind of the youth candidate on his first election, at least. But the point is that the idea that something's really going to change, really going to break, really going to be different, just doesn't exist in the minds of those of us below the age of 50 in the same way it might belong in the mind of someone who's above the age of 50, or at least something they can recall. Something really changing that happened, or changed for the better, maybe is a better way to say that. I belong to the generation of 2001 and the September 11th attacks. I belong to the generation of the Great Crash in 08, and I belong to the generation now of COVID. 3 big hits against us, plus the dot-com bubble, depending on how old you are. I'm 31. The people who are just ahead of me are about 40, got the dot-com bubble. People are just behind me. They're now getting the 2008 experience, but with COVID, which is almost worse. We'll debate that another time. And that's the real difference. Ever contracting, ever more crisis, ever more problems, and no overarching narrative either. At least the Cold War for the boomers, like, we wanted to win the Cold War. We wanted to beat the Russians. Even if you were sympathetic to the certain collectivist ideas, you didn't want the Russians to win. You wanted us to win. And now that we live after that consensus, that's really changed things. So I think that's one thing that needs to be that's one thing that needs to be talked about. So there's a few other comments along the way here. Somebody asked about the vaccine earlier. If we scroll up to that one, I think it was please comment on the experimental jab. I think it's a little bit further up. It might have been from Carrie. I'm trying to remember. No, Jackie. Yeah, there you go. Jackie Franklin. What are your thoughts on the experimental jab, please? I don't want to take the vaccine. I don't want to take it, and I'm going to do everything I can to not take it. I don't get the flu shot. When I was a child, I was inoculated. I don't come from a family of anti-vaxxers, if that's how you want to say those words. In fact, my opinions on vaccines, this is an interesting topic, actually. My opinions on vaccines changed over time because I was raised in a medical family. My father's a physician. And I was just raised in a family where, like, oh, yeah, like everything they kind of hand you over the counter is totally fine and everything like that. Now, my dad has a lot of criticisms over the bulk drugs that Canada gets into because he doses his patients who need the dose. They're very, if they're very unstable, they need help. And the name brand is great. The name brand has the right amount of stuff in it, and it's always better refined. And then in a few years, of course, the name brand turns into bulk, and then the Canadian government starts printing the bulk brand, and it's doesn't even taste as good, but it also has a lower dose, and that's it's a lower dose, and it isn't as reliable. So obviously there is a difference in pharmaceuticals, even to those whom are experts in it and also fundamentally trust the pharmaceutical system. I'm not going to say industry, but just like the idea in Western medicine that we have produced and mass produced items that improve your health, and then you consume those items, and then those things help you be healthier mentally, physically, etc. So that part of it is what I was raised in. So that was that kind of my pharmaceutical background that I was raised in. And then as I became actually through my journey into Roman Catholicism, that was actually the first place I ever bumped into anybody who had any ethical objections to vaccines. And because I was raised a Protestant. And so in the Roman Catholic world, obviously because they're very pro-life and that sort of thing, they came up with, I mean to say that somebody came up to me and said to me, I'm going on this trip somewhere and they want me to get this Twinrex vaccine or whatever. I shouldn't denigrate any particular vaccine because I actually don't know which one it was, but it was an inoculation for a trip, like for, when they do the Hep A, Hep B sort of thing, which of course you could just avoid by not having sexual relations with people who you don't know, or by not drinking water that hasn't been properly filtered and whatever. That's just a free piece of advice, but whatever. That person said to me, well, I can't take it because this is one of those vaccines that was developed with aborted fetal tissue. And I didn't know that. And we had this back and forth. And so I started to look into it a little bit more. Nothing super deep. I'm not an expert on this, but it turns out that there are vaccines that have been developed over the years because of children that were killed. And that blows my mind. I didn't realize that was a thing. Nobody told me that. And I have a strong moral and ethical objection to that fact. So I know that is also the case with some of the vaccines that have come out for COVID. There are vaccines that were developed without aborted fetal tissue and those that were developed with aborted fetal tissue. And I think that's wrong. That should never have happened. And I've heard that actually the success of using said tissue is wrong. That it's actually lacked success a lot of the time, and that living cells are better, and you can harvest living cells without damaging anybody from the amniotic fluid from birth, from the placenta. It's not we had to take a biopsy out of me or out of whomever in order to just have the tissue, little whatever, that'd be fine. But the point is that it doesn't require the death of a child in order to get access to this stuff, and that the stuff from the death of children has not worked. So I don't understand why that's even a thing. But the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that when it comes to the experimental jab, I'm not planning on taking it. I hope that I don't need to take it to do anything in life. I don't know why I would have to. This is a very terrible, awful, and apparently deadly it's coronavirus, but an influenza-like thing. It's a very awful respiratory it's a very awful thing. But I'm not worried about that. I'm hopeful for the others, and I pray for those who are sick, but I'm not worried about it for myself. And I think that's really important to just put out there, that I'm not worried about that. One of the things I wanted to come back to is I actually didn't get to finish my opening statement, so I'm going to bring that back up again, and we're going to expand it a little bit here. And I'm just going to skip to the part that I had there, and I'm just going to finish my opening statement because it pivots right into some of these questions you're asking. So the weather has finally turned on us here in northern British Columbia. After beautiful weather basically from Easter onwards till just a few days ago, we finally have those April showers that supposedly yield May flowers. Hopefully this spring brings forth new blossoms and new blooms in freedom, as this tired old theme of lockdowns, check stops, case numbers, and drudgery has lost its novelty, and it has become exhausting. As previously stated, I was laid off due to the pandemic in March of 2020 in order to not succumb to dependency or owe the government any money because of CERB. I decided to leave town and head up north, which is to say Churchill, Manitoba. and the last stop on the Hudson Bay Railway. I'd been there before once in 2017. I was actually helping my producer there, and he invited me up there. He needed another hand. This time around, I was going up there to, give aid to myself, as it were. I left Prince George, BC on May 1st, and I got into Churchill on May 5th, as you can believe that. It was quite the trip, and it was quite quick. And during that trip, I was only stopped once, and that was near Candle Lake, Saskatchewan, where my fellow Status Indians, I was to say one elder and a conservation officer, had put up a roadblock to keep out COVID carriers. At the Via Rail station in Thompson, Manitoba, we were cross-examined like kids at a confirmation. Do you reject the devil in all of his ways? Yes, we do. Have you been displaying any symptoms? No, we haven't. We answered in chorus. We literally answered chorus. We were not asked individually. It was pretty hilarious. I remember this. These interruptions were the only sign that life had changed from the virus. That's it. That's all I had for evidence up there. And then I think the reason I'm ruminating on all of this is that I'm about to go on a trip again at the exact same moment a year later. This time, it's not a journey away from my community into the unknown, but rather to expand my community and make myself known. I'm meeting my beloved's family by traveling through the interior of British Columbia. However, I am far more likely to be stopped this time than I was a year ago. In 2020, roadblocks were spontaneous community events. Today, they're policy. So what other options are there? I mean, life must go on even in the midst of a pandemic. That harsh conclusion last year is only different in tone for the more lovely trip this year. At least I get to be with somebody while I'm on this trip. Last year, I did that trip by myself, all those miles by myself. It was long, and I was headed away from home, and that hurt. Like, it hurt to be away from home and to have to leave over such a, I thought I'd made it. I had an adult job, and everything was going really well, and then COVID. It was rough. And I can understand how some people decided that was a reason to not go on. I didn't make that decision, obviously, but I can understand why some people felt that way. The point is that, I could not stay unemployed for long and owing the government money. That was the other thing about CERB. We owed the government money for it. And I can't be a mystery man to those who I'm going to call family soon and draw a debt against their charity, right? And patience. Failure to reach my destination wasn't an option last year. It's not an option this year. And this is common sense to everyone. Everybody understands what I'm talking about here, except our premiers and our provincial health officers. Perhaps that's why all of it, the lockdowns, the massive vaccine fallout, seems so surreal. I was isolated in Churchill for about half a year from it all. And in my community, we don't really hold any fears about it now. The pandemic has changed everything, even our habits and speech, yet life must go on. Proper ceremonies observed, adventures had, promises kept. I think that's another big thing, promises kept. The amount of people who have delayed their weddings because of this stuff, last year they had 50. This year they got 10. Keep your promises and just move forward. There's no holding back. There's no waiting for things to be better. Things won't get better as long as they have the control to do this. And we're all living two lives simultaneously. We live our pious lives under the czars of COVID, and we make all the right motions, and we tell them all the things they want to hear, and then we live our real lives where we go and live out our dreams. A year ago, the weather was so perfect, I managed to snap a photo of Mount Robson like you see in National Geographic from my driver's seat while in motion. I'm sure that the cops would love to hear that. And today, I'll be lucky to see past the next corner as the drizzle and the mist obscure the sun, muting everything. This is a far happier occasion. But our present circumstances are bleak. And I really do pray that April showers bring Mayflowers. We'll bring back up the comments there. I mean, I was a bit melancholic this morning and maybe a little bit too poetic. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that I actually am headed on a trip. It's essential travel in the sense that all travel is essential. All air is essential. If you stop breathing it, you don't exist anymore. At least not in this life. And so the thing is that we're going on this trip because we need to do this. I've talked about this a little bit before on this show, that it's very likely that things are going to come together for us rather quickly, rather soon. We've known each other a little while, and we're both very happy. And of course, we belong to a faith that's very clear about living together and that sort of thing, and we don't want to do that. And so that has certain imperatives and moral implications for us, right? And to be done in a reasonable and timely fashion. But the issue is that we also live in a time where nobody's going to see the celebration except on TV. The same way we're doing this, right? The same way we're having this discussion is via live stream, via camera and an internet connection, broadcasting to all the world. So we're going to do the same thing for what we're doing, and we're used to that. That's fine. We're well into. Well, it's not fine. I wish it was an open church and everything, but we're really long into this pandemic. We all understand how it works. That's not a mystery. The only question is what's going to happen with meeting people and having to introduce somebody to those people and having them get to kind of, endorse us and give us their blessing before this happens. And the thing is that one thing that we had, which was, okay, well, we may not be able to have everybody come to this thing because we can't, because of the rules we live under, but we can go to everybody else individually and just meet them and give them our 2 cents. Well, Bonnie tried to take that away too, and so did the other provincial health officers all across this country. And so I'm just trying to state that for the record as best as I can, that, life has to go on. You can't stay here forever. We have to move forward and we have to get towards something. But we're going to go back to the comments here, and we're going to scroll up a little ways to, I think there was somebody who had asked about, John Horgan's age is actually at risk. There's something else. Can you please rural urban split? Yeah, okay. Daniel F. Bernhard, sorry. The rural urban split. Yeah. Can you please deal with the rural urban split in opinions? So this is a bit of a pivot again into something else. I've lived on both sides of the rural urban divide. I was when I went to Trinity Western, that's my alma mater, I lived in the Lower Mainland, and yes, Langley at that time too, because that was less than 10 years ago, but Langley has blown up since then. Like, it was bad then, it was expensive then, but now it's, so it, that was pretty crazy. But the other thing that happens is that I was in Langley, so I got to see what an urban setting was like, right? Like, traffic and everything else, cost of places, cost of things. And I also got to see what urban concerns were like, because of course an urban concern is different than a rural concern. So then after I'd lived there for my schooling, and I'd come back every year, every summer I came home. When I went back home, we actually ended up selling the place that we had, which were in the suburbs of Prince George. I know it's hard to believe that Prince George has suburbs, but it does. And what happens is we're finally convinced that we want to get out of town. My parents decide that they want to buy a farm, of all places. They bought some pasture and they built a house on it, and then they started to farm it. And that was an incredible journey, and looking at the totally different realities of the urban and rural divide. And I'd say that for the urban reality, the fact of the matter is that life is just more communal. And you know what? If your garbage can doesn't get picked up, actually today is garbage day. Okay. Oh, my producer was on ball there. I was not. But your garbage can has to be out, and you want your garbage picked up at the right time. That's like the quintessential urban question. It's like garbage and sewer and zoning and permitting and that sort of thing. It is very communal. Like, everything's cut into little squares, right? Everything. This is a commercial lot. This is a residential lot. This is a commercial and residential lot. This is being reappropriated. The city's buying this. The city's selling this. It's this communal existence. And everybody has a stake in it to a point. And in the rural areas, there's a community existence. It's not communal in the sense that your nearest neighbor might be half a mile away. You could walk there. You can walk there, and people walk to each other's, quad to each other's houses, ride horses to each other's houses all the time, drive to each other's houses. But the thing is that you really are kind of your property is an extension of yourself to a point, and something you steward because you take care of it by having your own two hands on it and your own 2 feet walking around it, and you work the land and you walk your dogs on it, and you have chickens and cows and God knows what else running around. And that's kind of your relationship with it. It's a bit, it's kind of your little ark, little Noah's Ark in the middle of nowhere, next to your neighbor's little Noah's Ark and next to your friends. And with urban living, it is very much like it's your little life raft. You don't have the space for everything else, so you're just in your little apartment, or you're in your little house, you have your little yard, and everything from noise to complaints to this, to the sound of traffic, like all those things are experienced communally, and there's a different opinion on them all over the place. Whereas the kind of collective understanding out in the rural areas is that it's very much like you're probably going to have to take care of yourself. If there's going to be an intruder, you're probably going to have to pull out your own weapon and take care of this. You're going to have to, if there's predators, you're going to have to take care of them yourself. If there's a fire, hopefully the volunteer fire department shows up. And I'm not denigrating that, but I'm just saying that, you're probably going to have to try and put out the fire yourself. I think that's a lot of the rural urban divide when it comes to Canada. Without getting into too many details there, it's a quintessentially different experience. And ultimately, because you can get infinitely more services in a town than you can out of town, that's a big part of it. That's a really big part of it. So I'm going to keep going through the comments here and wander our way towards, let's see. There's a few different comments in here that were really good. Solidarity with progressives. That's funny. Similarly, the solidarity that progressives have requires a certain amount of disingenuous behavior that we call lies. Yeah, I mean, I maybe I could have said that comment while Stuart was still on, but I think that we lie to each other as much as they do. That's actually, I would do better with these rants alone when I have something controversial to say. And so far we've kind of retread a lot of the things we all know that I believe and you guys know I believe, and that's not really an adventure. So let's get into something more controversial here. I think that conservatives are just as good at lying as progressives are. And I think that we lie to ourselves and to worse a benefit than they do. Okay, I think the benefit is fundamentally less. So progressives, when they lie to each other and to us, they take territory. Okay. Did you know that we all used to say the Lord's Prayer, public school, private school, before school began? The progressives won that war. Now, there are progressives who do go to church. They go to some liberal churches, but they do go to church. And there are progressives who don't believe in God. And there are progressives who think that all religion should be abolished. And there are progressives who think that, I'm just become one with the spirits and the trees and whatever else. There are progressives all over the spectrum on that question. But together, one way or another, they eliminated the Lord's Prayer from school. They won that war. They got it. They have that piece of territory, and they will never give it up. And the Lord's Prayer is never coming back to public school. What did conservatives do in response? And where do conservatives lying to each other or not get anywhere? Well, conservatives thinking that they were all on the same page with, say, Aaron O'Toole. Okay. So all the conservatives lied to each other and said, he is both a progressive and a conservative. He will hold the line on he was personally opposed to abortion, but he is also not going to do anything about it. But if you want to be pro-life in his caucus, you'll be welcome there. He was every man to every man, right? He was anybody he had to be. And he walked down that road perfectly. And he got the nomination. And now he has a dumpster fire on his hands because the lies are coming unraveled. So everybody knows that Justin Trudeau has a terrible personal history, particularly with women and with some others, to put it as politely as I can. We're not going to get into false accusations here. If you guys got more evidence where you are, send it our way. We'll research it and we'll put it up there. But the point is that Justin Trudeau has a terrible legacy with a lot of different instances when it comes to women. And we all know that, and that's been widely reported, and yet nothing is done. And everybody who says they're a feminist that's in the Liberal Party knows that they're dealing with an absolute misogynist who, it's funny. They always say us Tories are misogynists. Well, we wouldn't accept him in our circles. If he was doing that to our women, he would have gotten tossed out on the street a long time ago. But The liberals, they all lie to each other. They lie to each other about everything. And why do they lie to each other? Because it gets them power and control. And so that's the bargain they make. They make a bargain with the devil. They will do anything they have to get more power and control. And then they seize that power and control. And then they use the CRA to attack people, especially people that they disagree with. And they use the powers of the state to get into all sorts of funny positions with people, disallow permits, disinvite people, defund people, cancel people, sideline people. They do it. They got it. They figured it out. They have their system figured out. And what do us conservatives get from even the smallest lie or the biggest lie we have? We don't win elections. We don't get anything better. We don't get better leadership. We don't get a coalition that can actually get anywhere. We don't get smart policy ideas. We don't move this nation forward. Why do we even bother having a party, even if it is a party made up of lies and compromises? The compromises and lies we're making aren't even getting us anywhere. I believe in the Bible said something about even the bad man knows how to give good gifts. If even evil people know how to do good, how much more so should you know how to do good if you are among the righteous? Well, this is exactly the question. If we're the good guys, if we're the conservatives, and we're supposed to figure this out, I don't know what to tell you, because the lies and the compromises we're making aren't working. They're a complete waste of time. They're a complete waste of time. We need to stop trying to conform to like 10 agendas at once. And we need to be honest with ourselves and say, we're not going to agree on everything, but we're going to agree on these 2-3 things, and we're going to move forward on those things. We don't want our guns to be gone. The ban that happened, the order in council that happened, the elimination of ARs, this is a waste of time. It wouldn't have done anything for the poor people in Nova Scotia. It wouldn't have done anything to stop that monster. We need to be honest with ourselves about that, and we need to take a no compromise stance. No compromise. This is my property. You have no right to it. I don't care what happened to your grandma or your best friend or whatever. I'm sorry. It is not because I don't care about you or care about them. I'm saying I don't care what happened, because that thing that happened had nothing to do with me. I want that to change. I want people who perpetrate those crimes. I want the death penalty brought back, and I want them eliminated after a jury of their peers, etc. But they should be for what happened. And that's it. That's justice. That's the end. There is no place for you taking my property because of someone else's crime with something that was probably already illegally obtained. That is not my problem. And that's what has to change in conservatism. Is the lies we're telling aren't getting us anywhere. So maybe we should start telling bold truth. You know? It's just, I just don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. We keep coming up with these conservative lies, right? Same thing with taxes. You know what? It doesn't make sense. Okay? It doesn't make sense that we have all these little tax brackets. It doesn't make sense that it takes, advanced degrees to understand our tax code. We need to stop that. It's actually a crime against the poor. And anybody else who can't get access to somebody who is better at doing the taxes than somebody else. H&R Block doesn't count. I'm sorry, guys. That just runs a very cursory glance through your stuff. The algorithm's already built. It's not a good system. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to throw the people at HR under the bus. I'm just saying that that's not good enough. Our system could be better than that. And it could be as simple as somebody literally moving a decimal point and timesing it by 2, and then that's it. We know what we need. Instead, it is literally Byzantine in its system. It is so many different layers. Look, if you want to fix Canada, then you have to have big, bold ideas. And if you want to be a good conservative, the little lies we keep telling and the big lies we keep telling aren't getting us anywhere. There's already a party that does all the lying. That party is established. That party has all the power. And until that party is destroyed, that is to say, the Liberal Party of Canada is destroyed, ended, am I going to say abolished? I don't know. Made so illegitimate that people would be physically disgusted to be associated with it. That's what I'm talking about. I don't need anything abolished. I don't need statist and rule-based things and even constitutionally based things in order to get my will done. Do you know there are things that we all do and don't do every day entirely based on taboo? Taboo works. So make it a taboo. Make it a denigration. Make it an awful, terrible, wicked, evil thing to ever be associated with the party that has done so much damage to this country. And watch it evaporate, and watch it disappear, and watch it burn to the ground, and do so with glee. And then move on and build a better world. Build a better world. We are in this terrible time. And when it comes to these questions, like, we conservatives aren't getting anywhere with our big lies and our little lies. They aren't doing anything for us. They're not giving us our schools back. They're not giving back our hospitals. We used to have elected hospital boards here in BC. How's that going for us? Having unelected ones. Is there even a place to have a debate about the question of abortion? Or anything else for that matter? Or euthanasia? Or how about just the cost of things? Or how about the fact that there's 600 managers and 2 frontline nurses? Why are we doing that? Maybe we should elect some new leadership. Maybe somebody else should be the CEO of the hospital and start talking about these issues and start being like, look, we got to take down the management. We got to put more frontline staff out there. We need to cut wait times by having more frontline staff. Where's that controversial idea? It's not a controversial idea. But where is it? Who's saying it? We conservatives are losing the war. We are losing. Every single day we lose a little bit more because we compromise and we tell lies, either big or small, and they still don't get us anywhere. I'm not saying that would be okay if they did, but then at least they'd get us somewhere. And they're not getting us anywhere. So this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. We got to tell big, bold truths. My guns are not your problem. My guns are my property, and you don't get to have them. End of discussion. Full story. If you want my guns, you need to demonstrably show I committed a crime using my guns. That's the other thing, too. If I've committed a crime that has nothing to do with my guns, that's still not a reason to take my guns away. And that's it. And if I do commit a crime with guns that is violent and especially results in serious harm or death, I deserve the death penalty. Absolutely. Jury of peers. Absolutely. Get out the gallows. It's time to bring it back. You commit violent, wicked offenses with intent in this country. That is absolutely the way things should be. And we need to be big, and we need to be bold, and we need to tell the truth about that in conservative circles and stop lying about it and stop finding ways to dodge that question, right? We do believe in a right to self-defense. We do believe that if you show up on my property and you are feigning violence at my family members, you might get as much as one warning. It's not even a warning shot. You're just getting a warning that says, son, no, this ain't happening. Get off my property, or else you're going to be carried off my property. That's how it is. And I say that as somebody who understands that it comes at you, you give it and you take it. I don't do that to someone else's property too. If I end up in the wrong situation, you know what? I might get it carried out of there too. So don't do that. Just be smart. Walk with some caution, have some humility. Don't be thinking you can be marching up to things and doing whatever. Places that aren't yours and making threats of people that you don't even know. Super dangerous. And it should be dangerous because that's the corrective force. I'm sorry. That's pretty blunt, but that's the reality of it. And again, taxation. We need to defang those elements of our taxation authority that are literally being used to persecute people. I can name them for you. They're in non-disclosure agreements right now, so I can't name them for you. But if you ever caught me personally somewhere and I could whisper it in your ear, I would. There are people who are being investigated by the authorities entirely for malicious intent. Entirely for malicious intent to try and undo the good that they do or to try and intimidate them into submission. That happens all the time. And we need to defang that. We need to defang that. We need to bring that part of our government to heel. We've got another comment in here. Yep, we are the only society that is daily background checks or continuous eligibility screening program. Not even police or politicians have that level of scrutiny. Legal gun owners are not the problem, and self-defense is always paramount. That's Cody Willier. He's a pretty big fan of the show. He's commented on our thing a couple of times. Thank you, Cody, for showing up again. I see Al Gage also made this point about thank you for bringing up the way Trudeau and Blair are attacking legal gun owners to this very day. And they are. They are. I got another story from Here, well, just 2 seconds. I'm just waving my producer down here. Just 1 second. So last year when I went for that drive, when I had to go to Churchill, and let me tell you, that really sucked leaving my community behind. And whoever helped this whole pandemic thing happen or whatever, and however we've made this worse, I'm not happy with you. I'm going to say the most Canadian thing ever. I am slightly upset at you because that really sucked leaving my community behind. Really sucked. But anyways, when I was on that drive, my first stop was Edmonton, Alberta. So I was leaving Prince George. I went to Edmonton. I stayed with my aunt. She lives in Edmonton. And in order to be prepared for my journey, I did take that CERB money because I was entitled to it because I was laid off due to COVID. I only took one payment. And I walked up to the Caballas in Edmonton, Caballas South in Edmonton, and I bought myself a 45-70 and 200 rounds and a case and cleaning kit and everything. It was great. I bought myself that with the CERB money. And then I wrote it off. So there you go. How's that? I can already hear somebody punching this in over at our local revenue agency. The point is that I did these things, and I had called in my order hours before, and they had it all ponied up for me. But it was May 1st. And I don't know if you know what May 1st was in 2020, but that was when the gun ban came into effect, right? There'd been the shooting earlier in that year, and that was a tragedy, and that was awful. And somebody should have taken their rifle or their shotgun or their slingshot and taken that guy out the first time before he got anywhere. It is unfortunate that he got as far as he did, and that was wicked and evil. And that man, I really don't think there's any redemption for that guy. But the point is that I was in Alberta now after the gun ban, the day of the gun ban, the day the gun ban came down. Now, let me tell you that those people were not amused. And anything that was long and rectangular in a skinny box, or anything that was a cube square-shaped box, was being carried out of Caballas. Like everything. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what it was. And this was a curbside pickup, right? Because we're in the pandemic. So this was curbside pickup. This is not people running around the store, grabbing everything and getting out. It's like, no. This is them calling it in, sitting in the parking lot. It was actually a really warm day that day. I remember it was May. It was actually, I didn't turn on my air conditioning because I don't use air conditioning in my truck ever. But I definitely had to go outside into the breeze and stuff because it was hot in that parking lot. Let me tell you. But people were sitting there and waiting for up to 90 minutes for an order just so they could have a gun and ammo. That's how upset people were with the gun ban. I talked to a guy who'd been working there for 15 years, and he said to me, I've been here for 15 years. I've seen Christmas come and go many times. We're doing Christmas every hour. I've never seen it like this before. Christmas every hour. That's a lot of angry people. We conservatives need to learn how to channel that anger into big, bold truths instead of trying to assuage that anger and find a new coalition with little, stupid lies that still don't get us anywhere. That's the thing about the carbon tax. It's a little lie being told by all of us. You know, it's a little lie being told by all of us that it's all going to be fine. We'll just do this little white lie and that little white lie, and we'll do this little compromise, and it'll make for a winning coalition. We'll beat Justin Trudeau. We aren't going to beat Justin Trudeau with stupid little white lies. We're going to lose. Okay? We're going to lose. Because you can't outlie a liar, and you can't out left wing a party that builds its entire identity around being left wing for the most cynical reasons and obtaining power. End of discussion. Full stop. We need to tell big, bold truths. A big, bold, well, at least big, bold truths, but also big ideas, big dreams. Canada was built on a dream. It was built on a dream by a conservative who was drunk all the time. John A. Macdonald. He didn't drink scotch, actually. He drank port, if you can believe that. But that's how Canada was built. By basically the sheer force of will of one drunk Scotsman, because he was born in Scotland, whose mom preferred Gaelic and danced a jig when he won his first election. I remember that being noted, and I can't remember which one that was. The man who made us. It might be Gwyn Dyer. I don't remember who wrote it, but the point is that, like, you know, That's how Scottish our founding was, and that's how cool our founding prime minister was. And he just dreamed up a big dream. It's like, I'm going to build a country. When's the last time we said that as conservatives? What happened to Diefenbaker's plan for Northern Canada? I've worked in Northern Canada. Okay, not even as far as Iqaluit and stuff like that, but I've worked at the end of a rail line. There's not even a road to Churchill. There's a winter road if you really want to chance that, but there is a rail line to Churchill. How underserviced Churchill is, how underutilized it is, considering that it is literally the gateway to the north. We have the entire Hudson's Bay. If the climate is changing, again, up for debate, no vote from this guy on that question. That means the entire north of Canada is open for business very soon. What's our plan? Where's our plan? What have we thought about here? The Hudson Bay is a giant, very, very cold, salty lake. It's not a bay, it's a sea. It's a gigantic sea, really. It's bigger than I think the Black Sea. I think I looked that up while I was there. It's cold and it doesn't care what you think. But the point is that it's this huge opportunity. It's this huge opportunity. And we're just wasting away. Where are the conservative ideas? Where are they? Where are the conservative ideas for how we might do better? It's literally, my producer just looked this up for me. It's literally 3 times the size. The Hudson Bay is 3 times the size of the Black Sea. 400,000 to 1.2 million, and we call it a bay. I am suing whoever titled it that. Anyways, the point is that, yes, it's a 3-sided body of water that sows the Black Sea. The point that I'm trying to drive home here is that Canada, it was built on a big idea. And we can be, a bigger, better nation. And I know we do kind of the sovereignty thing here at the Western Standard. I've told you guys before, I've been very candid about this. I'm ambivalent about the question of sovereignty. I would just rather do Canada better. And I've always thought that about everything. I'm not really a big fan of second marriages. I just believe you could do your first marriage better. You could actually redeem what you have in hand. That's something I'm going to try and take as a thought into my marriage. I mean, obviously, Roman Catholic can't really get divorced. Try and hide it behind an annulment, I guess. If there's legitimate questions, there's legitimate questions. But you could just do the first thing better. Chesterton talks about this all the time. You could live up to your principles. And so we conservatives need to live up to our principles. There's some really great ideas out there about how to fix this country and how to make it a better place and how to deal with our military and how to build better stuff and better infrastructure and manage things better and make things more equitable for people and give people a stake in the country and have them be able to buy a house. There are all sorts of ideas around these questions. And instead, we're going to get into a fight over the carbon tax and trying to impose a carbon tax that's more complicated and makes less sense of what's there right now and is hated by the base. Like, who's writing Aaron O'Toole's policy? Like, are you drunk? Actually, they're more likely high, because if they were drunk, at least they'd have some big, bold ideas. Cut the scene of John A. But, yeah, they need to stop getting high. Stop it. I don't care who you are, policy writer person. Put down the drugs, go sober up, confess your sins, and get it together. Good Lord. Anyways, I mean, as we kind of round out the hour here, and I kind of dwell on the last few things that kind of come to mind, I'm about to go on a trip during lockdown, during travel restrictions. I really hope I'm here on Tuesday with you guys. If I'm not here on Tuesday, you know where I am. Send money. I'll need it for bail. I'm not really worried about it. It seems to have been basically not enforced at all in this province. I don't think anybody's being detained, actually. So, the news came out and I was really angry about it. But now I'm just kind of like, it's just another stupid rule that's come up with Bonnie Henry that nobody's paying attention to. So congratulations, Bonnie. You've managed to be that school marm that everybody knew in school who just always had another thing to say about blah, blah, blah. Like, don't kick the ball too hard. Don't do this. Don't run too fast. Nobody cared what they said because their rules were plentiful and they made no sense. And there was universal nonconformity. And then they just punished people at will, right? right? So it just made no sense. But I am going to go on a trip, and I am going through the interior of British Columbia. I am leaving my health region, which is kind of hard to do considering my health region is 3 times the size of France. But it is possible to leave your health region. So I will be leaving my health region, and I'm going to go visit people, and I'm going to try and make a connection with the people that matter to my beloved, so that I in turn can get to know them, and we can make a life together someday. And I don't really see a way around that. I don't think there would be a way for me to defend myself if I were to not do that. And so I don't know if I'm allowed to evangelize on the show, or like I would like to encourage people on the show to do things that are currently, you know, under health order and stuff like that. But I will say that, like, I certainly wouldn't blame you for making the same choice that I'm making right now. I don't know if I'm a model citizen, but we need to live up to our promises. And in our promises, right, we do hope to love and to hold, right? And for better, for worse, and all that jazz, those promises of those particular vows. But we also promise to take care of our families, and being away from them all the time and not able to travel with them doesn't make sense. Looks like our favorite commenter, I mean, that's giving you a little bit too much credit, isn't it? But the Albertan says, sounds like necessary travel to me. Well, I with that endorsement, you know what? When the RCMP pull me over here in BC, I'll show them that permission slip. That and the Constitution. That and, you know, any number of our leaders traveling in the middle of the pandemic at will, not giving any bleeps about it. It's nonsense. Something I actually would like to know is if anybody likes these rants that I'm doing. I mean, I kind of see that the viewership, because sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. If anybody has a problem with the fact that I'm doing these rant things, because I'm not saying we don't have any guests. We do have guests, but you know, you got to secure people. And sometimes what happens, like, I don't want to throw him under the bus again, but a certain Mr. Max didn't show up on time, and so I had to kind of just keep rolling there. But I kind of like doing this stuff. I kind of like riffing. I should probably get some new material, but then again, I got to write all the material. So actually, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that this platform stays a people first platform and a community platform. What we need you to do is either comment, you know, right now, or comment below later, or send a message to the Western Standard, or even to my email at the Western Standard, which I'm pretty sure is ngida@Western Standard Online. So that's NGIEDE. So my first initial, I'm pointing at it like it matters. I should point this way because, yes, everything in TV is backwards. So you just take my first initial and my last name, and you get at Western Standard Online, and that's you're good to go there. And then you just send me a message and just let me know what you think about it all. And what topics would you like me to discuss? And this is the thing too. Like, here's the deal. I'm going to level with you guys. Okay. Like, I got me and I got my producer. Now my producer is always on the board, helping with stuff. And that's awesome. But the thing is that we don't have time to look up every single thing in the world, right? We don't have time. There we go. Actually, that works. So there's the email right there. Again, I'm on the opposite side. This is the email right here. I got to learn how to move on TV, eh? Just talking to my producer. I've got to be like the weather girl, right? Like, I mean, like, you have to point in the right direction, right? And this wind is blowing into this wind. And Bonnie Henry is full of hot air, right? There you go. So that's the banner there. Kind of makes sense. But it just, Send some messages. This is kind. Some people are already commenting. Love the rants. Another one says, love your talk. Keep it going. That's kind of you. I'm not just looking for adulation. I'm not just trying to boost my ego here. In fact, the day that I got this job, I looked at my beloved and I said, look, everybody who ever gets into this gig, their ego gets too big, and they always end up with the secretary or whatever, and it's not. Yeah, well, my producer is not exactly somebody I'm attracted to in that way, but I'm just, the point I made to her was, you know, I just said, look, I want to bring you everywhere. If I learned anything from my father and my mother and their marriage, is like, you know, you got to bring got to bring your other half everywhere, because guess what? The dancing girls are everywhere, and people can very easily rationalize going off and doing something that they wouldn't otherwise do if they had their beloved with them. And so it's very clear with her about that. And I'm not here to do an ego trip. That's not what I'm here about. I'm not here for crazy fandom and that sort of stuff. What I'm here to do is to try to give a platform to people who otherwise wouldn't have a platform, because everybody gets canceled nowadays. And two, I would like to know what you guys want to hear about and want to have discussed. Right now, we have certain parameters. I've told you guys before, we don't do Holocaust denials. We don't do swearing. And I was given an update the other day, because that's why we were in YouTube jail. No offense to anybody else, and even to those who hold those opinions. We don't do plandemic or scamdemic. And that's why I'm always, I walk right up to that line and I just say, look, I don't understand what's happening. I think our policy failures speak for themselves. I think at this point we need to just let it go and give everybody a mulligan and say, you know what, that was nuts. It's a crazy time to be alive, and let's move on. But that's as close as I can get to any of those questions. And for the record, do I think it was planned? No, I think that everybody's just that incompetent and out of touch with reality, because you can be nowadays. You just can be. You can be so far up your own whoop, right? That you literally have no idea what's going on. So I would blame incompetence before anything else. But I do think that now that the incompetence is happening, people are leaning into it. That I do believe. So those are two different questions. Was the start of it, coordinated? That's the word I was looking for. Was it coordinated? My answer to that question, no, it was not coordinated. But it was, I think, the result of negligence. And then people leaned into the negligence and they lied. And then we now have people who are just making hay out of, while the day shines. If you have this much ultimate power, why not just roll with it as far as you can? Because you don't get that opportunity many times in a generation or a lifetime. So that's what I think it is. That's how I think it works. That's as close as I can get to on that topic. But here's the point. Number one, we need more guests. So shoot me guests, okay? Send me guests in the emails. Suggest them in the comments. Do get me guests. I need them, okay? I need help. And I will, if you send me them and you've got your name at the end of that email, I will make sure that you are credited with that, okay? We're going to do a shout out to you and make sure that you know that I know that you did the hard work and I was just a lazy butt who just called the guy in the end. So send me guests. Send me suggestions about topics for the show and even topics for rants and stuff like that. I do need to type it up myself. Like those opening statements, I make those myself. So we've got our producer, we got me, we got a bunch of equipment in here. And okay, that's interesting, Shell. I definitely did send a message to Todd. Todd did get back to me a little bit. And I don't know where he's sitting with it all right now. Obviously, we at the Western Standard came down pretty hard on Aaron O'Toole with the carbon tax. So I know for a fact that there are conservative members of government of the opposition who are not interested in talking to us right now because we don't look so good to them because we're doing some stuff to their leader. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with the fact that our coalitions they come together, they break apart, they come together, they break apart. So that's a possibility. And there's a bunch of other possibilities with that. There's a few more suggestions there. I think Shirley Bond, I felt like I did reach out to him already. Michelle's got a whole bunch of things. I'd like to talk to Tim on the Libertarian Party. Yep, that's another person who could be spoken to. These are all great suggestions, and I'm really appreciative of that. We are coming up to the end of our hour, or rather the end of our 2 hours. And we do have a few suggestions here, so I'm very thankful for those, to be honest with you. I just want to close on this. It's been a long pandemic, and this was our first month as a show, and it had some highs, it had some lows, and the biggest thing, of course, that was good was you guys, the fans, and the biggest challenge was finding the guests and getting them to be here on time. So there's been some highs, been some lows, but I think the fundamental thing is that, again, here on Mountain Standard Time and here at the Western Standard, we attempt to do the right thing, and the right thing is giving people a chance to actually speak their minds. So Send me your guests, send me your thoughts, send me your questions, send me your concerns, and I will do my best to platform those as best as I can and to give that a voice and an ear. Until then, and until next month, our next show will be in May. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for supporting the show. Remember to like and subscribe. Remember to take out a subscription at the Western Standard. I'm Nathan Gita, your host, and I'm just so thankful you're here today. We'll see you again on Tuesday at Mountain Standard Time.